what we've built is essentially the best AI hacker on the planet.
And these had been present since the 1990s, for decades.
We have at least two that were there for 25 years plus in OpenSSL specifically. If you get these really strong AIs out there, someone has to come in and defend.
OpenClaw has gone viral. It's an autonomous AI agent. Cisco called it a security nightmare. Capability almost always beats out security.
I very much think that AI, especially with what we've built so far, is flipping this.
We have AI slop, as it's been called, but also AI breakthroughs when it comes to security research.
The media in the report is certainly going lower in terms of quality. AIs are really good at mimicking that and pretending it's a high-quality report, even if the substance doesn't correspond. We literally now have previously unknown 0 days, withstanding all the security effort from human researchers.
Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Stanislav Fort. Stanislav, thanks for being here.
Super happy to be here, Chris. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been watching you and the team and what you guys are up to, and as you know, you're right up my alley of vulnerability management, AI, automated discovery, all the exciting things. But for folks that don't know you and the Aisl team, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the team as well?
Totally, yeah. At Aisl, we've been building in the space of AI and security for the past year or so, roughly. And what we've built is essentially the best AI hacker on the planet. We pointed it at the most secure audited code bases out there, such as OpenSSL, and we're routinely finding previously unknown zero-day vulnerabilities in these code bases. Some of these vulnerabilities lurked there for literal decades. So we have at least two that were there for 25 years plus in OpenSSL specifically. And then, we're going through these code bases, looking at these legacy systems, and then also proactively finding new things as they're being committed. And our patches are landing in these major open source projects right now. So we're essentially converting what used to be an elite artisanal hacker craft into a repeatable industrial process by scaling this capability massively. And so the primary motivation for building this is seeing how incredible the rise of AI capabilities has been recently in coding and understanding software systems in general, and realizing how potentially full of vulnerabilities the human computer infrastructure is. And realizing that this combination is quite explosive. If you get these really strong AIs out there, someone has to come in and defend and make sure the critical software infrastructure the world depends on is patched. So we're coming in and trying to make sure this limited time window that just opened right now to patch everything is utilized to its fullest.
Yeah, I love what you guys are doing, and I love a few things you said there. One is this software, these widely used open source software projects and libraries and so on are critical infrastructure. They're used in everything, and I try to touch on this in some of the writing I've done. Is used in everything from consumer goods to critical infrastructure to national security weapons systems. It's so pervasive, and then we are at this unique time of AI where it can accelerate vulnerability identification, and we'll dive into this. But both for defenders and researchers and so on society, but also for malicious actors too. So it's a double-edged sword, of course. But you have this interesting background where you went from being in AI research at DeepMind and Anthropic and now co-founding a cybersecurity company. What was the moment or insight that convinced you that AI had reached a point where it could be used meaningfully to find these zero-day vulnerabilities, even in the most widely used code bases, well-audited code bases in the world? We always hear that phrase, what is it? Under enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And, of course, that doesn't apply to all open source software. Many of them are just a single or small group of maintainers. But some of the ones you guys are doing are the most popular ones on the planet, right? Like you said, they've been around for decades. Many, many, many people have looked at these code bases, and you're still finding new things. What convinced you that this was the moment and to make this leap from, AI research into cyber?
It's an excellent question. I actually started even before AI in physics. I used to be a physicist working on theoretical physics for my bachelor's and master's degrees at Cambridge. And then the pivotal moment in switching from physics to AI actually was AlphaGo, this system from DeepMind in 2015, 2016 that first beat the European champion in the ancient board game of Go that came literally decades ahead of schedule based on predictions at the time. And then that made me realize that like what we have right now seems to be quite magical. The capabilities AI is like now at a time, 2015, 2016, gaining seems to be akin to some sort of intuition, something that seems to be more than mere interpolation. So I quit physics, moved to California to work on AI, did my PhD at Stanford, focusing primarily on deep learning theory, so understanding how deep learning works deep down. Spent some time at Google Brain, DeepMind, and Anthropic working on eventually more and more security-related aspects of machine learning and language models specifically eventually, and realizing that the most amount of impact likely comes from the domain where the AI systems meet the classical software infrastructure we normally work with. So I did work on securing AI models as they are on their own, but the interaction between these systems and the rest of the world that runs on software is extremely underexplored and potentially dangerous and in need of being secured. And so we saw the rapid rise of AI capabilities in the recent years. And then I think even the people who used to be skeptical are now gradually kind of switching to the sides of this seems to be quite powerful. These systems seem to be, even if not doing exactly the same as human thinking, doing something very similar to thinking in terms of the functional output. And the rise of reasoning models in the last year that I think was brought to light to the mainstream public through DeepSeek R1, this model, at the beginning of 2025 that landed, like a meteor in the public consciousness. I think the reasoning models kind of unblocked many of the really difficult tasks of understanding software on the logical level. So that's when I realized this is likely to be an extremely potent source of understanding for these massive code bases. I'm happy to dig deeper into this, but I think reasoning models were a really pivotal moment for many people who apply AI to software.
Yeah. I actually was going to ask you a follow-on question to that because there was, folks were skeptical, and I feel like we went through this trough of disillusionment or something where people are like, well, it's cool, but it can't do X, Y, Z, or it's great, but it's just for throwaway projects, or and we kept trying to convince ourselves that like this isn't having the impact that it's going to have, and then now you've seen Linus Torvalds and many other people come out and say, you know what, it's pretty damn good, and like people are really starting to lean in and accept the reality of it. And folks have even used phrases like the days of writing code by hand are simply gone or going away, essentially.
Yep.
That doesn't mean software engineering is going away, but software development in a manual sense is fundamentally changing. Like, what is your read on like the advancement of the models when it comes to the impact on software development, maybe even beyond just cyber, but in general in terms of software development?
It's been absolutely incredible to watch. I think even from the inside, like I've been taken aback by the rapid growth in capabilities. I think, obviously a human is still a pilot of these systems. Like human is still in the center of the web of agents doing, the hands-on coding. But I think I rarely write any code by hand anymore, and I rather manage a fleet of agents doing many things on my behalf, so to speak. Although I do make sure absolutely that these things are not making any mistakes, and I'm in control in the intellectual sense of the word. But I still don't do the coding myself, and I think this shift is pretty pervasive in the field. I would say the capabilities of AI in cybersecurity are quite distinct from what we saw before. What we built at Aisl, the system we're employing, its main advantage is actually understanding the code base as a whole, understanding the intent behind the code base, and looking beyond the local kind of pattern matching discoverable bugs that you could have had before, memory errors, if statements not being correctly, applying limits to bounds of data types, stuff like that. Now, many of the things we're seeing are going way beyond that and being rather than local errors, the logical kind of the lack of foresight on the side of the maintainer or the builder of the project in foreseeing all the consequences of certain decisions in designing the code base as a whole. I've got a few examples we actually saw in real life. There's an open source project called Traffic that is kind of wrapped around Kubernetes, and there's a logical inconsistency in the way, or there was, I have to say it's fixed now, I would never speak about it before, but in that case, a Boolean flag turned to true in one of the pieces of software, got converted to a negative kind of inverted semantics in the other piece of software. And then, because the problem lied in this passing so many tests due to the wrong intent being encoded into the CI/CD testing of these like two independent pieces of software out there that interacted. So the interaction wasn't correct, and you had to see the logical structure of how these things work to actually discover this kind of a bug hiding very much in plain sight. But it took a logical understanding of the code base to make sure that this goes away. So I think these things were literally impossible to discover prior to the ascent of AI in cybersecurity. Like this is such a subtle thing, and the semantics is so subtle that it would be basically impossible to read this out using local pattern matching.
Yeah, speaking of, hiding in plain sight, like, so the way you guys got on my radar is, and I'm sure many others now, is like, you guys had these blogs and some research that you were talking about, things that you were doing, and you're credited with discovering, and I apologize if I get the exact numbers wrong, but I think it was 13 in 2025 and several more this year in OpenSSL, for example. And one of them was rated critical at a 9.8 CVSS. Like, and these had been present since the 1990s, as you said, for decades. And OpenSSL, right? We use that phrase of like under enough eyeballs. OpenSSL has been fuzzed for millions of CPU hours, audited by world-class teams, right, for decades. Like, walk us through what your AI system is actually doing differently that allows it to find, what all these prior efforts missed, like, and going from the process of discovery through patch generation, and moving towards like truly autonomous versus human-guided activities here.
Yeah, so I mean, the OpenSSL results have been tremendous to watch. We've been focusing on OpenSSL specifically because it's got a very warranted reputation for being one of the most audited secure code bases on the planet. As such, it's essentially the hardest benchmark you could ever apply your system to. Any toy task, any data set you might have locally, any capture the flag challenge is only mimicking what a true task you're designing your technology for is. And so we thought, why do we actually work on these benchmarks if you can go to the real thing? And in that setup, getting a validated CVE accepted by the maintainers on a project such as OpenSSL, the maintainers are extremely knowledgeable. They've got probably the best insight into the system out there. They're also very skeptical by their nature because they're getting reports that typically are not correct or subtly not correct these days due to AI being able to get the superficial structure correct. So to me, this is the hardest benchmark to surpass. And we thought if you want to make sure our AI cybersecurity system is like as good as would be needed for a live deployment, why don't we go directly into these live benchmarks, so to speak, and see whether we can literally discover new, previously unknown zero-day vulnerabilities in even the most secure audited code bases on the planet. So that's why we focused on specifically OpenSSL, curl, the Linux kernel, Chromium, Firefox, all these things. And I'm extremely pleased to say that we did find a number of issues, and we went through the responsible disclosure, at every single time, directly providing a patch together with the disclosure immediately to make sure that if the maintainers choose so and they verify the report, then they can directly apply what we sent over as a fix. In the case of OpenSSL, we now, just on January 27th, OpenSSL had a new release with a bunch of CVEs being announced and publicly fixed. And there were 12 CVEs announced, out of which every single one came from Aisl. And specifically was discovered, triaged, and verified, and the patch provided by our AI system. And of the 12 CVEs that they announced, that we all discovered, 5 literally directly applied verbatim the fix we provided, through our AI system, via email, through obviously a human checked whether it made sense, but more and more so we're getting confident that what we're sending over is high quality. So 5 of the patches landed directly in the official release of OpenSSL, and now, which is even more exciting to me because the work of the maintainers is extremely heroic. There are small teams doing incredibly important work, but they're often underfunded and understaffed. And now, super happy to say, OpenSSL and curl both are using our analyzer, so the key piece of technology we built, in their CI/CD pipeline, directly invoking that analyzer on their PRs as they're adding new code to the code base to make sure no new bugs are making it there while we're weeding out the legacy stuff from the past.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize something you brought up there is like the underfunded and part of this because a lot of these, as I said, are maintained by a single person or a small group of maintainers. They're underfunded, if funded at all in many cases. Like this is a technological challenge, but it's also an economic one, right? For many of these widely used components, libraries, projects, and so on. And you brought up curl, and I wanted to kind of touch on this because I feel like you use this phrase, the great bifurcation, where we have AI slop, but as it's been called, but also AI breakthroughs when it comes to security research. And Daniel Steinberg, the curl creator, he got a lot of publicity recently for shutting down curl's bug bounty program because of a flood of like low quality AI generated submissions. But at the same time, he's credited Aisl, with high quality discoveries and now routinely invoking your analyzer, like you said on the pull requests. And you've used that phrase, the great bifurcation, where AI is kind of simultaneously collapsing the median time to discovery and identification, but also raising the ceiling in terms of quality challenges. Like, how do you think the security ecosystem should distinguish between like AI generated noise versus genuine AI driven breakthroughs? And what responsibility, do you think AI security vendors have in preventing the slop problem? Because it can undermine the credibility of like the valid, research and identification if everyone just kind of writes it off as, oh, it's slop, it's noise, it's not good.
Is 100% a huge problem, and I think all these reactions are warranted, right? You get AI people excited about the capabilities rising, the maintainers worried and skeptical, and security people seeing another kind of addition to the never-ending backlog that we as I also want to drive to zero. It's all these perspectives are valid, and I think the position of open source maintainers is an extremely hard one. They are doing an incredibly important work for the whole ecosystem in general. They're doing an incredible job, and then I must say our interactions with them have always been very positive. We always follow their chosen responsible disclosure channels, be it a GitHub security report or an email, or with encryption or without, based on whatever they prefer, to make sure we are as helpful as we can be, because we recognize the value and the limited time and attention they have to spend on our particular report. So that's why we always send a fix together with the disclosure as well. Now, the great bifurcation you've discussed is definitely a view of mine. I think it is certainly the case that the democratization of access to AI, especially in cybersecurity, and combined with the financial motivation of people to get bounties in bounty programs, is collapsing the quality of the median report you're getting in this field. So I think the median report is certainly going lower in terms of quality, and in addition, losing the superficial markers that used to allow you to distinguish a high quality report from a low quality report. The language, the structure. Now AIs are really good at mimicking that and pretending it's a high quality report, even if the substance doesn't correspond to the superficial level of quality. So that's another problem with AI generated reports. But it's also the case at the same time that we literally now have previously unknown 0 days, some of which sat for 25 years in OpenSSL, withstanding all the security effort from human researchers and the millions of hours of CPU fuzzing time from the likes of Google that now have been discovered by our AI system. So the right tail, the ceiling of this distribution is also rapidly increasing. So any single point estimate of the distribution and building a narrative around it is inherently limited in terms of what it says about the situation. It is the same at the same time. It is the case that the median is going down. The slope is very much real, and under the burden of the slope, people are losing their patience with their bug bounty programs. But on the other hand, literally at the same time as Daniel Stenberg was canceling the bug bounty program for curl, we were assigned 5 CVs for the bugs we legitimately actually disclosed to curl and that were fixed there. So in the last release in curl 8.18.0, I think, of the 6 CVEs, 3 of them were discovered and reported by Aisl. So you see that both of these things are the case at the same time. It's just a shifting reality of what's happening in security as an industry, and we just need to get used to it. I think, obviously, there is a synergy between the maintainers and the providers of these reports, and then that needs to be fostered. I think we need to prioritize developers and make sure we recognize the inherent limitation of the time span and the incredible amount of work they have to put in to verify these findings. So, like, we specifically try to make it as easy as possible, and if we can make sure we can be deployed directly on the new PRs as new code is added, that's even better, because then we can catch it before the code ever makes it into a version. We actually did see a bunch of these issues in OpenSSL and curl specifically before they had us deployed, where we caught things that were in the main branch on GitHub, but before they were ending up in any version. So these are no CVs to speak of, which is actually a great thing for us. This is the ultimate goal, catching all these things proactively rather than reactively, before they make it into a code base and can do any damage to the users of the respective software project.
Yeah, I want to highlight something you said there before, which was emphasizing thinking about the developers, because I feel like in AppSec, if you've been a practitioner for some time, like myself, like we've went through different phases, and one of the most recent ones was quote unquote shift left, and we shoved all these tools in the pipeline. It was, in theory, it made sense, like find vulnerabilities right before they make it to production, and being more proactive rather than reactive. But the challenge was the tools were noisy, and
Yeah.
developers started. I think I laughed because one Harvard study, developers called security a soul withering chore, is the way they described it. And we beat them over these heads with these spreadsheets of all these findings that are low context, low fidelity, not reachable, not exploitable, not known to be exploited. Those kind of things from a vulnerability intelligence perspective. But I love that you stress the ultimate goal is moving to that proactive nature of integrating this into pull requests and pipelines and things like that. How do we get to that widespread adoption of this approach, of preventing rather than patching? But at the same time, to your point before, we have to do both because there's a lot of software already out there. You have to go address kind of the security technical debt that's so pervasive, but also change how we do things. Like, how do you see that unfolding now that we have like this promising capability?
Chris, absolutely right. Like the goal is obviously not to find bugs or get CVs, but rather to increase security of software as a whole. So whatever needs to be done in this pipeline is the thing to work on. And so if the limiting factor are like not enough disclosures about like important enough bugs, let's work on that. But then the whole pipeline has to be unblocked. The whole pipeline has to be as efficient as possible because ultimately the goal is to make software secure. I'm very much of the opinion that there is a decent chance of actually securing software as a whole. I think AI can be used both for offense and defense, but I think defense does enjoy a certain set of like highly important leverages in this. One of them being that whatever fix we land in a thing like curl or OpenSSL or the Linux kernel is automatically multiplied in its effect by that piece of software being so central to so many applications downstream. So I think that one patch can be suddenly in a billion devices downstream if done right. So I think there are certain advantages to the defensive side of things. Plus, it is certainly the case that there's only a limited number of real issues in these legacy code bases. And if we can, at the same time, weed out these and with deep understanding of the code base, actually discover all these looming kind of deeply hidden vulnerabilities and then remove them, and at the same time, catch every single one in the PR that's being introduced, I think there is a path, kind of a golden path of sorts, into the future in which software is actually meaningfully more secure due to the impact of AI. I would say in our case, maintainers don't seem to be only kind of tolerating us, right? They are actually like invoking proactively the analyzer we offered to them in their PRs on GitHub. And it's actually incredible to see how once they invoke it, they're actually discussing among themselves, specifically in the case of OpenSSL, the findings from it. And then I think in the real life, we are actually seeing that some of the bugs would have made it into the code base despite like the amazing effort on the side of the engineers. But that, you don't have eyes everywhere. You don't see all the logical consequences of everything. So like I vouch for like as much augmentation as possible. It is certainly the case that the amount of noise in these things is a determining factor, right? If you get one gold finding for 1,000 sloppy, nonsensical things, you don't have the appreciation for that one finding being drowning in that 1,000 kind of highly low quality things. So we've been very much focusing on making sure we are providing no regrets disclosures and no regrets patching of these things. And then empirically speaking, in terms of OpenSSL as a case study, which I'm mentioning a lot because it is extremely secure already, extremely high quality code base and great team behind it. We had, I think, below 5% false positive rate in our disclosures so far. Not all the bugs we reported got a CVE. They got fixed eventually, but within the security posture, not every even security relevant bug does correspond to a trackable technical CV. But beyond that, I think that the real false positives we're seeing are extremely rare from the system we've built.
So let me ask you, I guess a bit like we've nerded. You and I love this stuff. We've nerded out on CVEs, disclosures, vulnerability disclosure reporting, open source, and so on. Let me ask you kind of a business question because you guys have gotten headlines by turning this technology on widely used open source projects that millions of people depend on. But as we talked about, these projects are often underfunded, if funded at all. Like you have a business, right? Like it costs money to create this capability. You have to make it I imagine profitable and so on. Like it has to be sustainable to have this capability for the community. Like what's the what's the path, the financial path, right? Is the goal to also make this capability available to enterprise environments and paying customers, and so that we can continue to provide the capability to the open source ecosystem? Because I could see a case where it's amazing we have this, but someone has to actually pay to build and fund and maintain this capability itself, in addition to like the open source ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Technical philanthropy on its own is a very worthwhile goal, and I think given that so many commercial projects benefit from the security of open source kind of cornerstones of that ecosystem, that in some sense pays for itself, although that payment would not go to us, but rather to the overall security, so to speak, of the ecosystem as a whole. Now, being able to find vulnerabilities so deeply hidden in some of the most secure audited code bases on the planet does bode well for the likelihood of doing at least that well on private code bases that have never been under such an evolutionary pressure to weed out all the low-hanging fruits, at least. And so I think there's a very clear path to the commercial deployment of what we've built so far. But as you might understand, the security posture and details of private companies are very sensitive things. So I'd rather not go into the details of that, but we can definitely talk about the tech side of things. But I think the argument here is extremely clear to me. We are able to find previously unknown zero-day vulnerabilities in some of the most secure software out there. What do you think is the chance you don't have at that level, at least, of insecurity in your own private code base?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, that's basically where my mind was going with this, is like, if it can be done for some of these most well audited, code bases in the world, many organizations, as we know, have struggled to attract and retain security talent. They've struggled to keep up, AppSec engineering, keep up with, development. There's a great potential in the commercial front, I imagine, to harden some of the most widely used proprietary and commercial products as well. So that's kind of where I was going with that question. So you brought something up that I think is underappreciated. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but, the burden on the maintainers, like even, we're seeing high quality AI driven findings create additional work for maintainers. And if discovery scales at like AI speed, you guys are able to find and identify things much faster. But the number of people who can review, patch, coordinate disclosures, that kind of stays flat. We can end up with a cybersecurity, kind of burden on the maintainers, right? You've known that the 90-day disclosure timeline as well is designed for human speed discovery. Like, how serious is that structural mismatch, and what needs to change in terms across the ecosystem in terms of like funding models, disclosure norms, AI-assisted patch review to kind of prevent AI, driven discovery from overwhelming the kind of the maintainers, that the folks that build and keep these things up and running?
That's an excellent question. I think in any system consisting of multiple parts, if you increase the efficiency of one part, in isolation, you get clogged up in other parts of the system. I think this is the Baumol's disease in economics. It's often discussed, where some goods are increasingly more efficiently produced, which means that some of the things that are not more efficient are now costing more. So the relative effect is such that the slow, kind of burdensome parts are suddenly like more important and even more kind of clogging the system than before. I'm a big fan of augmentation here. I wouldn't view this as AI replacing anything, but rather the same human with their deep expertise, the same open source maintainer with their deep expertise can leverage a myriad of additional tools that give them the leverage to deal with the exceedingly big backlog and then the new findings coming in at this exceptional speed. In terms of discovery, at Aisl we've built a system that's end-to-end. It's everything from the discovery at the beginning all the way through triage and increasingly hard versions of verification, including hard verification against a compiled version of the thing and seeing whether it crashes, so to speak, and then even the diff protection and verification that nothing is damaged by it. So if that eventually works 100%, that would be the ultimate solution. I think there is a path, as I mentioned before, towards a secure software in the future that's very much AI enabled, in which everything new is being checked for mistakes, and then that is incorporated into the flow of fixing agents that like look at that disclosure. There could be different roles, kind of so to speak, to be played by different AI components in the system that are in some sense in adversarial relationships, not to kind of be sycophantic to each other, while we're working on the major task of actually removing all the most important legacy issues from these code bases. So I very much see a path here where AI plays a key role in every single part of the pipeline, from choosing targets to discovering new vulnerabilities, all the way to the fixing and verification at the far end. I think, yeah.
I think that's such a critical point, and I'm excited about that because I've been quipping lately. Like we've gotten great at finding problems, we haven't gotten great at fixing them, and like that's why vulnerability backlogs keep growing exponentially year over year. Like you see it with this EVE growth of just this EVE growth itself, but then internal to organizations, there's been different studies. It's hundreds of thousands to millions of vulnerabilities that are just piling up, and it's because like our capacity, to your point previously, you get an efficiency in one part of a system, it kind of another part becomes the bottleneck, right? So I think the remediation is now the bottleneck, and it's going to get even worse with this AI-driven discovery. So I'm glad to hear that full lifecycle approach that you guys are driving. Another thing I want to dive into with you all, and you had a great blog on this recently too, is OpenClaw, right? Like I feel like it's a kind of a case study of a security crisis that may be looming or coming, or already here in some cases, depending on the organization. Like in the last few weeks, OpenClaw has gone viral. It's an autonomous AI agent. It immediately Cisco called it a security nightmare. I think Gartner said block it immediately. We've seen over 500 vulnerabilities in its initial audit. 12% of the skill marketplace, for folks familiar with skills, are compromised with malware. 21,000 or even more exposed instances that are leaking API keys and credentials and so on. As someone building AI systems on your end that operate autonomously in critical security contexts, like how do you think about the tension between autonomy and security in agentic AI? And what does OpenClaw reveal about the systemic risks that are kind of coming with autonomous agents? It feels like this security capability trade-off. And as you probably have watched this ecosystem and the environment in general, capability almost always beats out security in terms of that trade-off, as well as like competing priorities of speed to market and revenue and so on. Like it feels like security is always at a disadvantage with those competing incentives.
I think you're totally right that this used to be the case, that like there was a trade-off between producing features and maintaining security. I very much think that AI, especially with what we've built so far, is flipping this. I think the OpenClaw case specifically is very interesting. I think the same kind of security burden that OpenSSL collected within the 25-year span of its existence like appeared in OpenClaw within a 2-week kind of like rush in building it up and spinning it up to millions of users. And at Aisl, we've actually looked at OpenClaw particularly as well. It's an open source code base, so we're interested in whether we can show this to our AI technology and see whether we would discover any serious issues in it. And then we were actually credited with 15 validated reports that actually landed in OpenClaw and were incorporated together with their fixes into the code base. And I still believe this is like 21% of the global accepted disclosures in OpenClaw in total. And we're the largest provider, number one provider of these things among all the research groups and individuals globally. So we were applying the very same underlying trend of AI capabilities growth in the past years to the defensive side very deliberately, not in a mad rush, but rather slowly, methodically with the security intent in mind to actually secure this AI agentic thing that has been kind of proving on GitHub within the past 2 weeks. So I think this is a very clear example where AI in our hands can be used to meaningfully increase security, even of a project that is like on its own agentic AI dependent, or where it plays a crucial kind of forefront role. So I think it's not as bleak as you might point, as you were pointing early on, but one needs intent and security mindset to make sure step by step you actually deploy these AI capabilities at a defensive side as well.
Yeah, I've actually been, everyone's familiar with crossing the chasm, and I've wrote some articles on this, but like security is almost always a late adopter or a laggard, right? Very risk adverse, and like what if X, Y, Z goes wrong? And I think we're slowly, in the case of AI, I feel like we've learned our lessons from the past of cloud and previous technological paradigms where we realize we have to be an early adopter and innovator of this technology to keep pace with developers, keep pace with attackers, or we're just going to fall further and further behind. So I'm excited to see the community embracing the technology and trying to apply it to our own use cases for security. And I think we will see that kind of paradigm change, to your point. And I wanted to ask you about this as well. Like we've talked about this a little bit of the kind of the arms race between defenders and attackers when it comes to AI. And your CEO has said that AI has today almost entirely favored attackers. But you've written that you believe autonomous vulnerability discovery like ultimately advantages defense because remediation scales more easily once you know what's broken. But you've also said that you hold the belief that with appropriate uncertainty you hold that belief. Given that the same AI capabilities are to find these vulnerabilities that Aisl uses, for example, could also find them for adversaries and attackers, to exploit them. And we've seen attackers exploit vulnerabilities within 5 days, right, on average, while defenders take 45 days or longer to remediate them. Like, how confident are you that this technology tips that balance in the favor of defenders in this kind of arms race that we're in?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I think, to be honest, the jury is certainly still out, and no one in the world knows the way this will end up eventually. But I'm a big believer in at least the massive opportunity for defense here. I think the window is pretty limited, in which we can do the legwork and remove all the most significant, most critical things from some of the most used software out there to make sure the legacy burden of their kind of vulnerability basis is limited. But it is certainly the case that the very same capabilities, that the ascent of AI as a field and the capabilities rise we've seen, that this will certainly be used by the offensive side. There's no doubt about that, because the offensive side will use whatever tool or whatever technology is available that will give them a leg up. So I think it's absolutely vital that the defense is also deploying AI to at least keep up. I think there's a decent chance of actually winning that race, and I'm very actively working on exactly that. But ignoring that side of the technological tree development would be a mistake for defense, for sure. I think but I'm very much a believer in the potential for securing software once and for all from now on, specifically using AI. But it's very much an active race, and then we're building in it, and then it's way bigger than any single team or any single company. So I think as a community, we need to mobilize behind this goal. But to be intellectually honest, the jury is still out, and we'll see in a few years' time. But I very much believe that the window of opportunity is now, and we should be acting.
Yeah, you're not alone. I was actually trying to pull this up in the background here. Jen Easterly, right, the former director of CISA, at the end of 2025, she had wrote a piece on foreign affairs that I just thought about. It's called "The End of Cybersecurity: America's Digital Defenses Are Failing, but AI Can Save Them." And she kind of made that case that you just talked about. And honestly, the work that you all are doing in the open source ecosystem right now of using AI to kind of find that low-hanging fruit, find these exposed, widely used projects, and remediate these things before they get widely exploited and become problematic for the community. So I think you're not alone, and people that are highly respected in the community share that opinion. And I hope we're all right. I hope we can do that, because the society's defense depends on it, honestly.
We actually saw Bruce Schneier, of Schneier and Security fame, like talking about exactly that point yesterday, and mentioning specifically the 12 out of 12 CVs in OpenSSL from Aisl as an example of that. So I think even among the most respected kind of thought leaders in cybersecurity, I think the recognition that AI will play a pivotal role in making sure things are secure is growing.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And that's what I was getting at earlier, is I feel like the community is kind of leaning in earlier than we have in other technological waves, like embracing the technology, which is really refreshing to see, after decades of being the office of no and being the blocker and all the other derogatory terms that we get in security. So you guys have this phrase at Aisl, you call it, focusing on this founding vision of zero vulnerabilities. Like, that's a pretty extraordinary claim, for an industry that's spent decades accepting vulnerability management as a kind of this never-ending treadmill, like hamster treadmill. Given what you learned in the past year, operating against production code, what do you think is the realistic trajectory? Are we talking about making like critical infrastructure like OpenSSL generally or genuinely vulnerability free within the foreseeable time frame, or is zero more of like a directional aspiration? And like, what does that mean for AI driven security research, to reach a point where maybe the open source foundations of the internet are, for practical purposes, like kind of hardened beyond what humans could ever achieve, basically?
That's an excellent question. I think the zero is certainly a directional goal, and it's an aspirational kind of like North Star we're aspiring towards. But I think it's very much an achievable thing. A software package or a software project is a logical mathematical structure that we can analyze. And in particular, that AIs can analyze in greater depth than anything previously accessible. Even the best coders on the planet have a limited attention span, limited capability of their brains to memorize things, to like see the consequences of everything, limited attention span. And the wisdom you were sharing, the typical kind of many eyes, make all bugs shallow. That's even more so when the eyes, kind of metaphorical eyes, are attached to like superior intellects in many ways to the human brain with larger attention span. fans, not getting tired, and actually seeing a broader structure of the software project in their heads, metaphorically speaking, at the same time. So I very much do not see any fundamental roadblocks in that path. I think we can make open source infrastructure that so many things depend on actually secure in the nearest future. Obviously, there's always a very long tail of things that need to be patched, need to be secured. Even if the main branch of a project on GitHub or a newest version of it is patched, it might not mean that every single router or IoT device gets that patched version. So there's always a long tail, and I'm very humble standing in front of the major scale of this problem. But I think some of the most critical pieces of this puzzle could get solved and will get solved towards the zero being the number of vulnerabilities in these areas in the future. So I'm a believer this is an achievable goal, yes.
Yeah, I actually share that. I think that we can drastically improve the systemic security of the ecosystem. And you point to some of the operational constraints in terms of like the patch may be available, but maybe it hasn't been applied in a lot of cases and like things like that. But I think that that can be addressed through some of the things we talked about earlier, which is moving towards automated remediation and things like that we've touched on. And I honestly, we talked a lot about open source, but I'm excited about the potential for this for closed proprietary source software as well, because despite all the headlines of software supply chain attacks targeting the open source ecosystem, many of the largest incidents are still highly involved around proprietary large commercial vendors that everyone depends on and run in all the national security systems, federal agencies, et cetera, governments, and so on. So you guys have this catchphrase, securing the future with superhuman autonomous defense. And it's at your website for folks that want to check it out, aisl.com, so AISL.com. I wanted to open the door.
AI.
Yes, AISLE.com. Sorry about that. But for folks that want to check out the website, do it there. But anything you want to plug in there as we wrap up, to keep an eye out on, or you want to throw out there for the community in terms of your team?
This is an incredibly exciting time for AI, in security as a whole. So we're rapidly expanding, rapidly hiring across the globe, and I think this is a solvable problem. The magnitude is huge, but I think we're seeing some very significant headway from the industry right now. So I think the more people working on this, the better. I'm genuinely excited about the potential of AI to like drive the number of critical vulnerabilities in the most important software out there to zero. So exciting times ahead.
Yeah, I'm rooting for you all, and I'm excited to see this technology applied in this context. So I appreciate you jumping on, Stanislav, and having the conversation with me, and hope you have a good afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's been a blast. Thanks.
Absolutely. Take care.